The alien fleet did not announce its arrival. It did not negotiate. It did not warn anyone. It simply appeared in orbit above the human colony of Acheron, 120 warships sliding silently out of hyperspace, like predators that already knew the hunt was over. From the command bridge of the flagship, the alien commander watched the colony below with open amusement. Acheron was young, barely 40 years old. A mining world carved into red mountains and frozen deserts. Population: 200,000 civilians, engineers, scientists, and almost no military presence. A perfect target. The Empire had spent centuries expanding across nearby systems. Dozens of species had already learned the same lesson. Resistance was pointless. Humanity, the commander had been told, was a recent arrival to interstellar politics. Clever, perhaps, curious, but inexperienced. Not dangerous. The Empire's analysts predicted the colony would surrender within minutes. The invasion fleet deployed landing carriers. Orbital jammers activated. Communication satellites fell silent. On the surface, alarms began to scream across Acheron settlements as shadows of alien warships crossed the sky. People ran through the streets. Cargo transports lifted from landing pads in desperate evacuation attempts. Mining drills shut down across the mountains. From orbit, the alien commander studied the chaos with satisfaction. Yes, this would be quick. But then something strange appeared on the fleet's sensors. No defensive weapons fired from the planet. No panic transmissions escaped the atmosphere. Instead, a single comm signal rose from the colony's central command tower. A narrowband transmission directed straight toward the alien flagship. The commander allowed it through. The image that appeared on the main display showed a human officer standing quietly inside a control room. Behind him, other humans moved calmly between consoles. No fear, no urgency, just quiet focus. The human looked directly into the camera. Then he spoke one sentence. "Your fleet has exactly 6 minutes to leave this system." For a moment, silence filled the alien bridge. Then the commander laughed. 6 minutes? The invasion had already begun. Dropships were descending toward the colony. Orbital cannons were ready to fire. Humanity had no fleet in the system. No visible defenses. Nothing that could threaten an Empire's war armada. And yet, the human officer didn't look afraid. He simply reached forward and tapped a control panel beside him. And far beyond the orbit of Acheron, something woke up. The colony of Acheron was never meant to be important. When humanity first settled the planet 4 decades earlier, it was classified as nothing more than a remote mining outpost on the outer edge of human territory. The surface was harsh, its thin atmosphere barely breathable, and violent dust storms swept across the red plains for weeks at a time. Most of the galaxy ignored places like Acheron. Even human corporations treated it as a temporary operation to extract resources, ship them home, and move on. But over time, something unusual happened. Acheron survived. The settlers adapted to the hostile climate. They built underground cities carved directly into the rock beneath the mountains. Massive industrial drills opened tunnels that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Laboratories appeared beside refineries. Engineers, scientists, and technicians arrived from across human space, drawn by rumors that the planet contained rare mineral structures never before seen in known systems. Still, to the wider galaxy, Acheron remained invisible. And that was exactly why it had been chosen. High above the planet, the alien invasion fleet moved with the calm confidence of an empire that had conquered worlds for centuries. The empire dominating this region of the galaxy believed in simple rules. Younger civilizations either submitted peacefully or were brought under control by force. Humanity had resisted political pressure for years, refusing to join imperial trade systems or military alliances. To the Empire's rulers, that resistance was an insult. They believed humans needed a demonstration. A small colony destroyed quickly would send the right message. So the fleet had arrived without negotiation. Dropships burned through Acheron's thin atmosphere, descending toward the colony's main settlement fields. Dozens of armored carriers spread out across the desert, preparing to deploy invasion forces that expected little resistance from a population of miners and engineers. From orbit, the alien commander monitored every movement with quiet satisfaction. This operation would take less than an hour. Yet something continued to bother him. The humans below were not behaving like a population about to lose everything. Emergency shelters were activating, yes. Civilian transports were moving toward underground hangars. But the panic his analysts predicted never truly appeared. Instead, organized evacuation corridors formed almost instantly. Traffic patterns across the colony adjusted with perfect coordination, and every human military frequency remained strangely silent. Then the commander noticed another anomaly. Several of his ships had begun receiving faint signals from somewhere beyond the outer edge of the system. Not distress calls, not transmissions from human fleets, just short bursts of encrypted data. At first, the signals seemed insignificant. The Empire had long ago learned to ignore human experimental communication systems. But as the minutes passed, more of his ships began detecting them. The signals were synchronized, precise, repeating in a pattern that his tactical computers could not immediately decode. The alien commander leaned forward slowly in his command chair. He suddenly remembered the human officer's calm warning. 6 minutes. 3 had already passed. And something in the dark beyond Acheron was answering that signal. The first alien dropships touched the surface of Acheron 4 minutes after the fleet arrived. Their descent cut through the dusty red sky like falling blades of metal, engines roaring against the thin atmosphere as dozens of armored carriers slammed onto the desert outside the main human settlement. Massive landing struts crushed the sand beneath them, while armored doors opened slowly along their hulls. Inside those ships were soldiers of the Imperial Expeditionary Forces, veterans of dozens of conquered worlds. They expected frightened civilians. Instead, they stepped into silence. The desert around the colony was empty. No militia. No defensive barricades. Only the distant towers of the settlement, rising from the rocky terrain, their lights glowing faintly in the dusk. The alien ground commander studied the scene through his visor, confused but not concerned. Human intelligence reports described the species as inventive but chaotic. Civilian populations rarely organized efficiently under pressure. Perhaps the evacuation had simply happened faster than expected. His troops began advancing toward the outer perimeter of the colony. Armored vehicles rolled forward, scanning for resistance. Nothing. No gunfire. No ambushes. Just empty streets and abandoned machinery. High above them, the invasion fleet continued to dominate the sky. But on the flagship bridge, the alien commander had stopped smiling. More of those strange signals were appearing across his sensor displays. Hundreds now, all coming from outside the system. And every single one of them was synchronized. He ordered the fleet's artificial intelligence to decode the transmissions. The response came back almost immediately. The signals weren't communications. They were activation keys. Somewhere far beyond the orbit of Acheron, automated systems were waking up. Thousands of them. The commander felt the first trace of unease tighten across the bridge. He turned his attention back to the human colony below. Still calm. Still quiet. Too quiet. And then the system's outer defense satellites' ancient installations the Empire had assumed were long abandoned began transmitting new signals of their own. The tactical officer spoke carefully. "Commander, Those satellites are no longer dormant. The commander frowned. That is impossible. Our scans showed no active weapons platforms in this system. The officer hesitated. Yes, Commander. That is what the scans showed. A pause filled the bridge. Then the sensors began detecting something else. Shapes. Hundreds of them. Emerging slowly from deep space beyond the outer asteroid belt. At first they looked like drifting debris. Old mining platforms. Abandoned industrial stations. Derelict cargo frames left behind by decades of human expansion. Objects the Imperial fleet had ignored completely during their arrival. But now, those objects were moving. Power signatures were rising across the darkness of the system. Engines ignited. Targeting systems activated. And the alien commander finally understood the meaning behind the human officer's calm warning. 6 minutes. Because Acheron had never been just a mining colony. It had been a trap. The alien soldiers advancing toward the colony did not yet understand what was happening in orbit. To them, Acheron still looked like an abandoned settlement. Rows of industrial towers stood silent along the outer mining fields. Cargo cranes hung motionless above empty landing pads. Autonomous mining vehicles remained parked exactly where their operators had left them. It looked like a colony that had fled. But the silence was not panic. It was preparation. Inside the underground levels of Acheron, thousands of civilians were already secured in hardened shelters built deep within the planet's crust. The colony's engineers had designed those tunnels decades earlier when the first mining operations began. Officially, they were meant to protect workers from seismic instability. In reality, they had another purpose. Deep within one of the central control chambers, Dr. Maya Chun stood beside a large tactical display that showed the entire star system in motion. Hundreds of signals were appearing across the map now. The outer asteroid belt was lighting up with activation markers as dormant platforms powered online. Hidden reactors began warming after years of silence. Defense grids unfolded from structures that had once been labeled as mining infrastructure. Every piece of it had been placed there slowly, quietly, across decades. Not one of them had been classified as a weapon. Because technically, they weren't. At least, not until now. Admiral Adrian Cole's voice echoed across the command room through the secure military channel. Orbital activation sequence is complete, he reported calmly. All deep space platforms responding. Maya watched the alien fleet symbols hovering above Acheron's orbit. They still held the advantage in raw firepower. But they had made one critical mistake. They believed they had entered an undefended system. What they had actually entered was a fully prepared battlefield. The alien fleet commander was only beginning to understand that truth. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, sensor officers were now speaking over each other as the tactical displays filled with new objects appearing across the system. Hundreds of powered signatures. Then thousands. Weapons platforms. Drone carriers. Autonomous missile arrays emerging from hidden compartments inside what had previously scanned as mining stations. Even worse, many of those installations were positioned behind the alien fleet's formation. They had surrounded themselves without realizing it. The commander stared at the display in disbelief. How did we miss all of this? He demanded. No one answered, because the truth was obvious. Human engineers had built the trap to look like ordinary industry. Cargo scaffolds, refinery towers, mining platforms. Every structure had been deliberately designed to appear harmless to distant scanners. For 40 years, Acheron had slowly transformed into something else entirely. Not a colony, a fortress. And the 6 minutes the human officer mentioned were almost over. On the bridge of the alien flagship, the countdown ended. 6 minutes. At first, nothing happened. The invasion fleet remained in perfect formation above Acheron. Dropships were still descending through the atmosphere. Imperial cruisers kept their weapon arrays locked on the silent human colony below. For a brief moment, the alien commander felt relief. Perhaps the human warning had been nothing more than a desperate bluff. Then the first ship went dark. It was a destroyer positioned on the outer flank of the formation. Its energy readings vanished from the tactical display, so suddenly that several officers assumed it was a sensor malfunction. But then the ship's emergency beacon activated. The destroyer had lost power. Across the bridge, alarms began appearing one after another. Not from enemy weapons, from inside the fleet itself. Multiple vessels were reporting system failures. Navigation arrays freezing. Weapon targeting systems rebooting without command. Drone hangars refusing to open. The commander rose slowly from his chair. "What is happening to my fleet?" No one answered immediately, because at that exact moment, every tactical display on the bridge shifted simultaneously. New signals had appeared. Not outside the system. Inside the fleet. Small objects were moving between the Imperial ships too small to appear clearly on long-range scans. At first, they looked like debris drifting through space. But they were not drifting. They were maneuvering. Thousands of compact machines moved silently between the alien vessels, attaching themselves to hull plating, weapon ports, sensor clusters, and communication arrays. The alien commander stared in disbelief. "Infiltration drones," one officer whispered. "Not weapons designed to destroy ships. Weapons designed to disable them." For decades, human mining operations across Acheron had quietly produced something else alongside minerals. Micro machines, maintenance drones, repair swarms, industrial nanofabrication systems, perfectly legal under interstellar trade regulations. No one had ever questioned why a mining colony needed so many. Until now. From deep inside Acheron's command center, Dr. Maya Chun watched the swarm moving through the enemy fleet. "Phase 2 complete," she said quietly. Admiral Cole's voice returned through the channel. Enemy propulsion systems degrading across 70% of the fleet. In orbit above the planet, the alien commander finally understood the scale of the trap. His ships were still armed, still powerful, but most of them could no longer move. And now the hidden platforms surrounding the system were powering their weapon arrays. The human officer's 6-minute warning had not been a threat. It had been mercy. Years before the invasion of Acheron, long before the Empire even noticed the small human colony, Dr. Maya Chun had already begun asking questions that most leaders preferred to ignore. Humanity had entered the galactic community only a few decades earlier. At first, the discovery of alien civilizations had filled Earth with excitement. Trade agreements formed quickly. Scientific exchanges flourished. Human explorers traveled through dozens of systems alongside alien diplomats who spoke of cooperation and stability. But Maya Chun studied patterns. And patterns never lied. Every expanding alien empire in that region of the galaxy followed the same cycle. First came friendly diplomatic contact, then economic integration, then political pressure. Finally, when a young civilization resisted too strongly, a military intervention appeared to restore order. The empire dominating nearby sectors had repeated that process for centuries. Officially, they called it protection. But Maya called it absorption. She presented her concerns to the United Systems Council on Earth. Most diplomats dismissed the warning. Humanity was too new, too small, and too economically valuable to be targeted so soon. But one man listened carefully. Admiral Adrian Cole. Cole had commanded human deep space patrol fleets since the earliest days of interstellar travel. He trusted Chun's analysis for a simple reason. History on Earth had followed similar patterns. Powerful nations rarely tolerated independent neighbors forever. So while diplomats negotiated with alien governments, Cole quietly asked a different question. What would happen if diplomacy failed? The answer was simple. Humanity would need time. Time to protect its colonies. Time to evacuate civilians. Time to prepare a response strong enough that no empire would ever attempt the same strategy again. But humanity could not openly build a military force large enough to challenge an interstellar empire. That would trigger the very war they hoped to avoid. So the preparation had to remain invisible. Mining infrastructure, industrial drones, communication relays, energy reactors buried inside asteroid fields. Nothing that violated interstellar law. Nothing that looked like a weapon. But together, those systems could become something very different. For years, humanity quietly expanded these installations across remote frontier systems. Acheron became the first full-scale test. A colony placed deliberately in a location that alien expansion fleets would eventually reach. A settlement designed not only to survive invasion, but to control it. And now, decades later, the Empire had arrived exactly as Maya predicted. Not because humans provoked them, but because history always repeated itself. What the Empire did not understand yet was this. Acheron had never been meant to win a war. It had been designed to teach the galaxy a lesson. At the time, many leaders on Earth believed Maya Chun's strategy was unnecessarily cautious. The Empire had not threatened humanity directly. Trade routes between human systems and alien markets were expanding rapidly. Diplomatic envoys spoke constantly about cooperation and mutual prosperity. To most politicians, preparing for conflict with a distant empire sounded paranoid. But Admiral Cole understood something that diplomats often ignored. Peace in space was not guaranteed by goodwill. It was guaranteed by preparation. So instead of building obvious warships or military bases, humanity began constructing something far more subtle across its frontier colonies. Infrastructure. Across dozens of new settlements, mining corporations quietly received government funding to expand industrial operations, far beyond what was economically necessary. Asteroid refineries were built with power outputs large enough to support entire fleets. Cargo stations were designed with docking ports that could be converted into launch arrays. Automated construction drones multiplied across remote systems, constantly assembling new structures in deep space. To outside observers, it looked like aggressive economic development. And technically, that was true. Every installation could operate as a legitimate industrial facility. But each one had been designed with hidden secondary functions. Structural reinforcements allowed platforms to survive combat-level impacts. Power conduits could redirect energy into weapons arrays. Communication relays formed encrypted networks capable of coordinating thousands of autonomous systems across entire star systems. Nothing violated interstellar regulations. Nothing looked like a weapon. Until the moment those systems received a specific activation signal. Dr. Chun and her team spent years designing that signal. A network protocol hidden inside ordinary industrial communication software. Harmless data packets that move constantly between mining platforms, cargo transports, and research stations across human territory. Alien trade inspectors had scanned the system dozens of times. They found nothing unusual, because the activation key was incomplete. It required a precise synchronization pattern across thousands of transmitters. A pattern that could only be triggered from within a prepared system. Like Acheron. Now, decades after those first quiet preparations began, the final sequence had finally been transmitted. And across the entire star system, the dormant infrastructure of a mining colony was becoming something else entirely. A defensive network powerful enough to trap an invasion fleet. Back in the present, the alien fleet above Acheron was beginning to realize how deep the trap truly ran. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, the tactical display had turned into a storm of warnings. Red symbols blinked across the star map as more ships reported loss of propulsion, sensor interference, and targeting failures. The infiltration drones were still spreading. They moved like a cloud of microscopic engineers across the Imperial fleet, slipping through cooling vents, maintenance ports, and exposed weapon housings. Instead of destroying systems, they rewired them. Thrusters lost coordination. Targeting computers looped false data. Power grids fluctuated as if something inside the ships was quietly rewriting their control architecture. The alien commander clenched the edge of his command console. "This is sabotage," he said sharply. "Purge all external systems. Isolate propulsion. Activate internal defense protocols." His crew moved quickly. But it was already too late. The drones had not been designed to attack ships from the outside. They had been designed to become part of them. Across the fleet, internal maintenance systems began responding to the drones as if they were legitimate repair units. Security protocols ignored them. Automated doors opened for them. Power conduits rerouted energy exactly where the drones needed it. The Imperial fleet's own infrastructure was helping the swarm spread. A cold silence slowly replaced the earlier chaos on the bridge. Because the tactical officers were seeing the same thing. The fleet was losing control. Not through destruction, through quiet occupation. Meanwhile, far beyond the alien formation, the hidden installations of Akron were completing their final preparations. Massive structures hidden among the outer asteroid belt were unfolding like mechanical flowers, revealing rows of long-range kinetic launchers. Deep space communication towers began synchronizing thousands of autonomous drones waiting in storage bays. Missile platforms rotated slowly into firing alignment. All of it had remained invisible during the fleet's arrival, because none of those systems had been active. Until now. Inside Akron's command center, Admiral Adrian Cole studied the tactical display calmly. The alien fleet still possessed enormous firepower, but their ships were immobilized, surrounded, and partially blind. "Final defensive grid online," one officer reported. Cole nodded once. He turned toward Dr. Maya Chun. "Your prediction was correct," he said quietly. Maya looked at the frozen alien fleet above the planet. "No," she replied. "My prediction was optimistic." She paused. Empires always believe the same thing. Cole raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That smaller civilizations won't be ready." Above Acheron, the alien fleet had finally stopped advancing. For the first time since the invasion began, the Empire was the one surrounded. The alien commander refused to accept what he was seeing. Empires did not fall into traps set by mining colonies. His fleet still possessed overwhelming firepower. Even if propulsion systems were compromised, their weapons could still burn the surface of Acheron into molten glass. "Prepare orbital bombardment," he ordered coldly. "If we cannot maneuver, we will erase the colony from orbit." Tactical officers immediately began aligning firing solutions toward the planet below. Heavy cruiser cannons rotated slowly. Missile bays opened. Targeting computers attempted to lock onto the settlement grids that had appeared so defenseless only minutes earlier. For a brief moment, it seemed the Empire might still turn the situation around. Then every targeting screen on the bridge froze. A single message appeared across the fleet's tactical network. "Unauthorized command override." The commander stared at the words in disbelief. "How is this possible?" he demanded. His communications officer answered slowly. "The infiltration drones. They have reached the fleet's command relay nodes." Across the Imperial fleet, weapon systems began shutting down one by one. Missile guidance computers lost connection. targeting arrays disconnected from the central command network. Even manual firing protocols began locking out their operators. The drones had not simply disabled propulsion. They had reached the heart of the fleet's control systems. Now they were rewriting them. Beyond the fleet's formation, the hidden installations of Acheron completed their final activation sequence. Dozens of massive kinetic cannons rose from concealed platforms among the asteroids. Missile carriers deployed swarms of autonomous interceptors. Thousands of defense drones formed coordinated attack formations across the system. Every weapon pointed toward the immobilized Imperial fleet. But none of them fired. Inside the command center beneath Acheron's surface, Admiral Adrian Cole watched the frozen battle map. The Empire's ships were completely surrounded. Yet he gave no order to attack. Instead, he opened a direct transmission channel to the alien flagship. Moments later, the image of the same human officer from earlier appeared once again on the alien commander's main screen. The human looked calm, almost patient. "You were given 6 minutes to leave," he said quietly. The alien commander clenched his fists. "You planned this invasion response for decades," he growled. The human officer nodded slightly. "Yes." A long silence passed between them. Then the human spoke again. "And if we had wanted to destroy your fleet, we already would have." The alien commander stared at the human officer in silence. Around him, the bridge of the flagship had become unnaturally quiet. The earlier alarms had faded, replaced by something far worse for an Imperial officer. Stillness. His fleet, one of the Empire's most powerful expeditionary forces, was now floating helplessly above a colony it had expected to conquer within minutes. Weapon systems disabled. Propulsion compromised. Communications partially controlled by an enemy that had never fired a single shot. For the first time in his career, the commander realized something deeply unsettling. This battle had been decided long before his fleet arrived. "You built this system to ambush us," he said slowly. The human officer did not deny it. "We built it to defend ourselves," he replied. "Defense does not require surrounding an invasion fleet with thousands of weapons," the alien commander snapped. The human tilted his head slightly. "History says otherwise." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The commander studied the human's face carefully. There was no anger, no arrogance, only calm certainty. That calm disturbed him more than any threat could have. "You could destroy us," the commander admitted. "Yes, and yet you hesitate." The human officer glanced briefly toward someone off-screen inside the command center before answering. "Because destroying your fleet would solve nothing." That answer triggered a ripple of murmurs across the alien bridge. The commander narrowed his eyes. "Explain." The human officer leaned slightly closer to the camera. "Empires do not learn from defeat," he said quietly. "They learn from humiliation." Behind the alien fleet, the first of Acheron's massive defense platforms finished aligning its weapons. Targeting beams traced silently across dozens of immobilized warships. Not firing, just locking. A demonstration. Across every alien vessel, sensor warnings began to appear simultaneously. Thousands of targeting systems had acquired them. Every ship in the fleet now understood the same terrifying truth. If the humans fired, none of them would escape. The alien commander exhaled slowly. "You are sending a message," he realized. The human officer nodded. "Yes. To us?" The human paused. Then he answered. "To the entire galaxy." Across the alien fleet, the realization spread slowly, and then all at once. The Imperial ships had arrived expecting a conquest. Their officers had imagined frightened civilians, desperate negotiations, maybe a few ineffective defensive weapons. Instead, they had flown directly into a system that had been preparing for them for decades. Every sensor across the fleet now displayed the same impossible situation. Weapon platforms hidden among asteroids. Missile grids surrounding the outer orbit. Drone swarms moving silently through the void. Thousands of targeting locks. Not a single shot fired. The Empire's fleet was no longer fighting a battle. It was sitting inside a demonstration. On the flagship bridge, the alien commander finally understood the scale of the humiliation unfolding before him. The humans were not trying to destroy the fleet. They were showing that they could. He studied the tactical display again, this time more carefully. The defensive network surrounding Akron was not random. It had layers. Outer platforms capable of intercepting any ship trying to escape the system. Inner drone swarms already embedded inside Imperial vessels. Kinetic launch arrays positioned to strike engines, weapons, or command bridges with surgical precision. Every path of retreat had been calculated. Every response anticipated. The human officer on the screen had been telling the truth. The fleet could not win this fight. But something else was becoming clear as the commander analyzed the system. The humans had not designed the trap to destroy a fleet. They had designed it to control one. That distinction changed everything, because it meant something far more dangerous than a battlefield victory. It meant the humans had planned not just the battle, but the consequences after it. The commander looked back toward the human officer. "You said this message is for the galaxy," he said. "Yes. And what exactly are you trying to prove?" The human officer paused. Then he answered in the same calm tone as before. "That humanity is not a civilization that waits to be conquered." Across the alien fleet, the targeting beams from Acheron's defense grid grew brighter as thousands of weapon systems finished locking into position. The message was clear. Humanity did not want war. But if war came, they would be ready long before the first shot was fired. For several long seconds, the alien commander said nothing. On every screen around him, the same reality remained frozen in place. His fleet, once the symbol of imperial dominance, was now completely surrounded by a network of weapons that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The humans had not rushed. They had waited. That realization unsettled him more than the trap itself. Most civilizations reacted to threats emotionally. They built fleets quickly, armed themselves loudly, and hoped strength alone would discourage enemies. But humanity had done something else entirely. They had prepared quietly. The commander looked again at the human officer, standing calmly in the command center beneath Acheron. "You expected us," he said. The human did not hesitate. "Yes. How long?" The question lingered for a moment before the answer came. 32 years. Several alien officers turned in shock. 32 years. That meant the colony had begun preparing for this invasion before the Empire had even started expanding into nearby sectors. The commander felt a slow wave of respect mixed with unease. "You built an entire system-wide defense grid, just in case we arrived." The human officer shook his head slightly. "Not just you." That answer drew a heavy silence across the bridge. For the first time since the confrontation began, the alien commander began to understand the true scale of the situation. Acheron was not an isolated defense system. It was a prototype, a proof of concept. If humanity had done this once, then they could do it again. In other colonies, other systems, perhaps across their entire territory. The commander exhaled slowly. "So this demonstration, this humiliation," he said carefully. "You want the galaxy to believe that attacking humanity is impossible." The human officer met his gaze. "No," he replied calmly. "We want them to understand that it would be a mistake." Outside the flagship, the silent standoff continued. Thousands of human weapons remained locked on the immobilized Imperial fleet. And still, not a single shot had been fired. The alien commander slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Around him, the officers of the Imperial flagship watched the same tactical display in silence. What had begun as a routine conquest had transformed into something far more dangerous for the Empire. A lesson. And the lesson was spreading far beyond Acheron. Across the galaxy, long-range observation networks had already begun detecting the unusual energy signatures coming from the system. Trade stations, diplomatic outposts, and independent sensor arrays quietly started recording the same data. An Imperial invasion fleet had entered a minor human colony. Minutes later, it had stopped moving. That alone was enough to draw attention. Because Imperial fleets did not stop. They advanced. They conquered. They absorbed. But now thousands of warships were sitting motionless in orbit above a small mining world. As the situation unfolded, fragments of encrypted transmissions began reaching nearby systems. Merchant vessels relayed the signals. Listening posts forwarded them deeper into the galactic communication web. Rumors began forming. Then speculation. Then quiet concern. Inside several alien governments, intelligence analysts started examining the data more closely. What they found unsettled them. The energy output of Acheron's hidden defense grid suggested decades of construction. The drone infiltration patterns showed technological coordination, far beyond anything previously attributed to human military doctrine. Even more troubling, the human forces had not fired. Not once. The implication was difficult to ignore. Humanity had achieved total tactical dominance over an Imperial invasion fleet. And chosen restraint. Back above Acheron, the alien commander was realizing that same truth. He looked once more at the human officer on the screen. "You have already won," he said quietly. The human did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the tactical display showing the immobilized fleet. Then he spoke. "This was never about winning." The commander frowned. "Then what is it about?" The human officer answered with the same calm certainty he had shown from the beginning. "Making sure this never happens again." On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, the silence stretched longer than any battle alarm ever had. For centuries, the Empire had expanded through certainty. Fleets arrived. Resistance collapsed. New systems joined Imperial control. That pattern had never failed. Until now. The alien commander slowly studied the tactical display once more. Every angle of escape was sealed. Human weapons surrounded his fleet in a layered grid that had clearly been designed to trap, not destroy. It was a cage, but an open one, because the human defense network still had not fired. Not a single weapon. That detail mattered. The commander turned back to the human officer, still visible on the screen. "You intend to let us leave," he said. The human officer nodded. "If your fleet withdraws from this system immediately." Several officers on the alien bridge reacted with quiet disbelief. The Empire had invaded. The humans had won. And yet they were offering the invaders a way out. The commander leaned forward slightly. "You had the opportunity to destroy one of the Empire's largest fleets," he said carefully. "That would have made your species feared across the galaxy." The human officer met his gaze. "Fear is unstable." That answer seemed to confuse several of the alien officers. The commander studied the human again. "And what do you want the galaxy to feel?" For the first time since the conversation began, the human officer allowed the faintest hint of a smile. Respect. The word hung in the air. Because the demonstration unfolding around Acheron had already achieved exactly that. The alien commander finally looked back toward the frozen tactical map. 120 Imperial warships. Every one of them immobilized. Every one of them surrounded. He knew the truth now. The Empire could continue fighting and lose everything. Or it could withdraw. and survive the lesson. Slowly, he gave the order. All ships. The bridge fell silent. Prepare emergency retreat. Across the Imperial fleet, damaged propulsion systems began struggling back to life as the infiltration drones gradually released control over the engines. Human targeting systems remained locked, watching, waiting, making sure the message was understood. Minutes later, the first Imperial warship turned away from Acheron. Then another. Then another. The invasion fleet that had arrived expecting conquest was now retreating in complete silence. Behind them, the defense grid of Acheron remained perfectly still. Humanity had won the battle, without firing a single shot. The retreat of the Imperial fleet did not happen quickly. Warships the size of small cities turned slowly in the darkness above Acheron. Their engines struggled at first, recalibrating after the infiltration drones gradually released control over their propulsion systems. From the surface of the planet, the people of the colony watched the sky. Massive alien cruisers that had once filled the horizon were now drifting away from orbit, their silhouettes shrinking as they aligned for hyperspace exit vectors. No cheering erupted in the underground shelters. No celebration. Only quiet relief. Because everyone inside the colony understood something important. This moment was not just about survival. It was about what came next. Inside Acheron's command center, Admiral Adrian Cole stood beside Dr. Maya Chun as the tactical map slowly cleared. One by one, the red symbols representing Imperial ships began leaving the system. Cole folded his arms as he watched the fleet withdraw. "They're going to report everything," he said. Maya nodded. "Yes, and the Empire will respond." "Yes." Cole glanced toward her. "You're very calm about that." Maya looked back at the tactical display, where the final defensive platforms were slowly returning to standby mode. "They were always going to respond," she said. The Admiral considered that for a moment. "You think they'll attack again?" "Eventually," Maya replied. The Admiral frowned. "That sounds less reassuring than I expected." For the first time since the battle began, Maya allowed herself a small smile. "It should." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She gestured toward the empty space where the Imperial fleet had just been. "Because next time," she said quietly, "they won't underestimate us." High above the planet, the final alien warship vanished into hyperspace. The system fell silent again. But across the galaxy, the story of what had happened at Acheron had already begun to spread. And the lesson it carried was impossible to ignore. Humanity had prepared for decades. And when the moment came, they had been ready. The first reports from Acheron began arriving across the galaxy within hours. At first, most governments assumed the transmissions were exaggerated. Frontier traders often spread dramatic stories, and Imperial fleets rarely encountered meaningful resistance from younger civilizations. But the sensor data told a different story. Independent observation stations confirmed that a full Imperial invasion fleet had entered the system. They also confirmed something even stranger. The fleet had left. Not destroyed, not damaged beyond repair, simply forced to withdraw. Inside diplomatic centers across dozens of alien civilizations, analysts began studying the recordings from long-range sensors that had captured fragments of the confrontation. The patterns were unmistakable. Human infrastructure had activated simultaneously across the system. Defense platforms hidden within asteroid fields. Autonomous drone swarms infiltrating warships. Industrial installations transforming into coordinated military systems. Every piece had been constructed legally. Every piece had appeared harmless. Until the moment they were activated. For many alien observers, that detail was the most unsettling part of the entire event. Humanity had not built a visible war machine. They had built potential. Quiet systems, flexible systems, infrastructure that could become something else when the moment required it. That approach was unfamiliar to most galactic powers. Empires built fleets. Humanity built preparation. In several star systems far from Acheron, political leaders began asking uncomfortable questions. If one remote mining colony could immobilize an imperial invasion fleet, how many other systems had humanity prepared in the same way? How many industrial platforms across human territory were quietly waiting for the same signal? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, if humanity had the power to trap an empire's fleet without firing a shot, what else had they been preparing? Back in the imperial capital, the retreating fleet's commanders were already delivering their report. High Arbiter Vrax listened in complete silence as the recordings from Acheron played before him. The trap, the immobilized fleet, the calm human officer offering mercy instead of destruction. When the report ended, the chamber remained quiet for several long seconds. Finally, Vrax spoke. Humanity has changed the balance of power. No one in the chamber argued. Because for the first time since humans had entered the galactic stage, the oldest empires were beginning to realize something uncomfortable. They did not fully understand the newest civilization among them. In the days that followed, the Acheron incident spread through every major communication network in the galaxy. Not through official announcements, through recordings, censored data, fragments of the conversation between the alien commander and the human officer. Every piece was studied, replayed, analyzed by governments, militaries, and intelligence agencies across hundreds of star systems. At first, many leaders believed the same explanation. Humanity had simply built an unusually powerful defensive system. But the more analysts examined the data, the more unsettling the truth became. The defense network around Acheron had not been assembled quickly. It had been growing for decades. Every asteroid platform had been placed carefully. Every drone system had been integrated slowly into civilian infrastructure. Every communication relay had been designed to synchronize with thousands of other systems. The scale of coordination required to build that network was staggering. And if humanity had managed it once, then it was almost certain they had repeated the process elsewhere. Inside the imperial capital, High Arbiter Vrax stood alone in the observation chamber, overlooking the endless lights of the city world below. The report from Acheron still hovered in front of him. One small colony, one imperial fleet, one quiet warning delivered by a human officer. 6 minutes. That number echoed in his thoughts. It had not been a threat. It had been confidence. And confidence like that did not come from improvisation. It came from preparation. Vrax slowly turned away from the observation window. For centuries, the Empire had believed it understood the younger civilizations of the galaxy. They were predictable, ambitious, often reckless. Humanity was none of those things. They were patient, strategic, willing to spend decades preparing for a single moment. That realization unsettled him more than the loss of the fleet, because it meant something simple and dangerous. Humanity had not reacted to the Empire's expansion. They had anticipated it, and Acheron had only been the first demonstration. Across the galaxy, a new question was beginning to form in the minds of countless leaders. If humanity had spent decades preparing for a single invasion, how far ahead were they already planning? Weeks after the fleet's retreat, the system of Acheron looked quiet again. Cargo vessels moved slowly between mining platforms. Civilian transports carried supplies between the underground cities and the orbital docks. Industrial drones resumed the same work they had been doing for decades, cutting rock, refining ore, assembling structures in the asteroid belt. From a distance, it looked like nothing had changed. But every observer in the galaxy now knew that was not true. Because somewhere beneath that ordinary industrial activity existed a defense network capable of trapping one of the largest Imperial fleets ever deployed. Inside Acheron's command center, most of the emergency operations had already been shut down. Tactical displays were returning to standard monitoring mode as the colony slowly transitioned back to normal operations. Admiral Adrian Cole stood near the main observation window overlooking the planet's surface. The red deserts of Acheron stretched across the horizon beneath the station. Dr. Maya Chun entered the room quietly. "The final report from the fleet monitoring stations just came in," she said. Cole didn't turn immediately. "They crossed the Imperial border." "Yes," the Admiral nodded once. "So the Empire has its answer." Maya stepped beside him, watching the silent world below. "Not just the Empire," she replied. Cole finally looked toward her. "You think the rest of the galaxy will react differently?" "Of course." She gestured toward the system map projected above the command floor. "Every civilization out there is asking the same question right now." Cole crossed his arms. "And what question is that?" Maya's voice remained calm. "If one human colony could stop an invasion fleet." She paused for a moment. "How many others could do the same?" Cole studied the star map in silence. Across human territory, hundreds of small colonies looked very similar to Acheron. Mining stations, research outposts, industrial hubs scattered across dozens of systems. Places most empires would normally ignore. Now every one of them looked different, because the galaxy had learned something new about humanity. Humans did not build defenses only when war arrived. They built them long before anyone realized a war was coming. The effects of the Acheron incident continued spreading across the galaxy long after the Imperial fleet disappeared into hyperspace. Trade routes shifted. Military patrols changed course. Several smaller civilizations quietly canceled negotiations that would have placed them under Imperial protection. No one announced these changes publicly, but the pattern was clear. The balance of power had moved. Inside the Imperial capital, High Arbiter Vrax sat in the council chamber, surrounded by advisors and military commanders. The same leaders who had once debated how quickly humanity could be absorbed into Imperial systems were now studying a very different question. How dangerous were humans becoming? The recordings from Acheron had already been analyzed hundreds of times. Every detail studied, every tactical decision examined, and every analysis reached the same conclusion. Humanity had not acted emotionally. They had not retaliated with overwhelming force. They had not attempted to destroy the fleet. Instead, they had demonstrated control, precision, patience. Those qualities were not typical of young civilizations. They were the behavior of species that had learned from centuries of conflict. Vrax slowly closed the report in front of him. "For the first time," he said quietly, "the Empire has encountered a civilization that prepares for war differently than we do." One of his military advisors spoke carefully. "Should we begin preparing a larger response?" Vrax considered the question. Then he shook his head. "No." The chamber fell silent. "No?" The High Arbiter stood and walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. "If humanity had wanted war," he said, "they would have destroyed our fleet." The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. "But they didn't." Vrax turned back toward them. "That means something." He paused. "It means they want the galaxy to understand their strength, without forcing us into open conflict." Another advisor leaned forward. "Then what is their strategy?" Vrax answered without hesitation. "They are buying time." The room grew quiet again, because every leader present understood the implication. A civilization that spent decades preparing a trap like Acheron would not stop preparing after using it once. Months passed after the incident at Acheron. The mining colony returned to its quiet rhythm. Ore shipments left the system on schedule. New tunnels were carved beneath the red deserts. Cargo ships arrived and departed as if nothing unusual had ever happened there. But the galaxy remembered. Every military academy studied the recordings. Every intelligence agency re-examined human infrastructure. Every empire quietly updated its strategic maps. Acheron was no longer marked as a minor mining world. It was marked as a warning. Across human space, hundreds of colonies continued operating just as they always had. Industrial platforms refined metals in asteroid belts. Communication relays connected distant systems. Autonomous drones built new stations on the edges of unexplored regions. To an outside observer, it looked like normal expansion. Economic growth. Scientific exploration. But now the galaxy saw those activities differently. Because Acheron had revealed something important. Human infrastructure was never just infrastructure. It was preparation. In the imperial capital, High Arbiter Vrax reviewed the final strategic analysis from his advisors. The conclusion was simple. The Empire could still defeat humanity in a prolonged war. But it would no longer be easy. And it would never again be predictable. Vrax closed the report slowly. From this moment forward, he said to the council chamber, all Imperial fleets will treat human systems as fortified territory. No one objected, because the lesson of Acheron was already clear. Humanity was not the youngest civilization anymore. It was the most patient one. And patience, the galaxy was beginning to learn, could be the most dangerous strength of all. Long after the fleets had gone and the reports had been archived, the name Acheron remained in the memory of the galaxy. Not because a battle had been fought there, but because one had not. Across star systems and civilizations, military historians replayed the same moment again and again. An empire arrived with overwhelming force and left without firing a shot. At first, many species tried to explain it through technology. They studied the drone swarms, the hidden platforms, the infrastructure networks that had turned an ordinary mining colony into a system-wide defensive grid. But over time, most analysts reached the same conclusion. Technology was not the real story. Preparation was. Humanity had not built a powerful weapon. They had built time. Decades of quiet construction. Decades of planning. Decades of asking a single uncomfortable question. What happens if peace fails? While older empires relied on fleets and dominance, humans relied on something slower. Patience. The kind of patience that builds infrastructure before enemies appear. The kind that hides strength inside ordinary work. The kind that prepares for a future no one else believes will happen. And when that future finally arrived above Acheron, humanity did not panic. They did not rush. They simply activated what had already been waiting. That moment changed how the galaxy understood humans. Not as conquerors, not as rebels, but as a civilization that survives. A species that learns from history. A species that prepares quietly while others argue about power. And perhaps that was the most unsettling realization of all. Because the lesson of Acheron was not that humanity could defeat an empire. It was that humanity had been ready for the empire long before the empire knew humanity existed. From that day forward, every fleet commander who approached human territory remembered the same warning. Not a threat, not a boast, just a simple truth the galaxy had learned the hard way. Humanity does not wait for the future to arrive. Humanity prepares for it.